Hey mamas, welcome to Breastfeeding Relief with Bethany. We share incredible stories, tips, and breastfeeding ideas to help on your journey. I'm your host, Bethany Laverne, a lactation consultant and speech therapist who helps mamas with breastfeeding. Not all breastfeeding stories are the same, and we dive into those topics. Welcome to another episode of Breastfeeding Relief with Bethany. Today we welcome Diane. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how many kiddos you have?
Hi, Bethany. Thank you for having me. I have two kids, two boys. They are now 10 and 8. And I am also a podcast host. I host a podcast called the Healing Birth Podcast that is all birth stories, but also it's sort of geared towards anyone who's had a difficult birth experience and had to heal from it. And I started that show because of my own experience. It was kind of the show that I needed when my first child was born. And that has been going on for 5 years now. It's on its 5th season. It's how we connected. And yeah, I live in Hawaii with my family, and we spend a lot of time outside, obviously, at the beach. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Yes. Well, I am also a boy mom of 2. So I love that. And I love your podcast. That is so needed. You know, I started this podcast for moms so that they understand that breastfeeding isn't easy. And I love that you're also taking moms through trauma. I just feel birthing should be so much easier. And we've just made it so complicated that moms don't understand when they go into their first one, really what to expect. I feel like we just kind of walk in like, oh, you're going to take a hospital tour and you're good to go. So I just love that you're doing that for moms. You know, I've had a few moms recently that I'm like, you should really have a birth plan and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, nope, I'm going to do it all natural and it's going to be fine. And I feel like they walk out with these horror stories. And I'm like, no, please hire the doula. Please, do some research yourself. So that's my disclaimer, mama. So go take a listen to her podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it can be a great educational tool too. I mean, a lot of people that I interview now say that they learned a lot about what to expect about birth or, potential things that could happen from listening to other women's stories. It's such a natural way that we learn. So, yeah, thank you for that little plug.
Yeah, no, it's great. Even at my own shower, for our baby, the one thing that someone said right away was, please don't share your birth story because we don't want to scare Bethany. And I was like, well, no, I feel like that's an awful opening statement. Like, no, you don't want to say all like the gory stuff, but we should prepare moms for what they're going into instead of like they get there on the day that they're delivering and they have 1,000 questions and they don't know what's happening to them. And their room surrounded with a ton of nurses and doctors, and you're just like scared at the moment. Like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And you have no other choices. So anyways, yeah, lovely. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about your breastfeeding journey with your boys?
Sure. Well, my first baby, that, as you can imagine, the whole reason that I do what I do now is because of my own personal experience. So that first birth was a traumatic birth that ended in a cesarean, which I don't think the whole story is necessary for me to share, but I do think it's relevant that it was a surgical birth because I've later learned that having a surgical birth can really impact breastfeeding, especially in the early days. So that breastfeeding journey with him was so challenging. The first thing I remember is being in just a lot of physical pain, both my breasts, but also just my whole body from recovering from the experience of the cesarean birth. And I struggled with low supply, according to some people. I don't exactly know how you would know more than me, like how that is determined, but I was told I had low supply. I struggled with mastitis. Just everything about the first really 6 months of breastfeeding my first son was an absolute challenge. Just all of it was so hard. And I will say, though, that at the 6-month mark, I no longer had any nipple pain. My supply seemed to be totally in sync with his needs. And I don't know if it's normal that it takes that long for breastfeeding to finally feel not awful, but I really do think in my case, it started out really disrupted
Mhm.
by some of the medications that I was given, the fluids that were in my body, the having a surgical birth. And then I also think that the emotional trauma of that experience probably affected our breastfeeding journey. And I also will say about that I was, and I'm grateful that I had this approach to it. I was absolutely determined that breastfeeding would work with that baby. And I hear this from a lot of other moms. Sometimes when we have a birth that really didn't go the way we wanted it to, certainly a lot of cesarean birth moms say this, that we can feel as if our bodies have failed us.
Mhm.
And so what's this thing that we have left? We have breastfeeding. We have this other function that happens during the maternal period that, okay, this thing has to work because birth didn't really work for me, but this is going to work. I hear that from a lot of moms, and I definitely had that mindset. I also, of course, wanted to nourish my baby in the best way possible. That was really important to me too. And, our bond was a bit disrupted by, being separated. And so breastfeeding was really important for me in that regard as well, because I wanted to bond with my baby. I wanted to give him this nourishment, and I wanted to prove to myself that my body was not broken and that
Mhm.
at least this one function I could do correctly. So that was my first baby. I can pause or I can continue and tell you how it went with the second one.
Yeah, why don't we pause for a second? There's
Sure.
so much good stuff in there because I feel like, and even with my own first OBGYN, who I did not agree with her by the end, but she did say almost all first babies are born by cesarean. And I don't feel like it had, yeah, yep. She kept
Oh.
pressuring me into scheduling it because he was going to be born around Labor Day. And she told me I had plans. And I said, "That's okay. Somebody else can deliver my baby. You don't have to be there." So we did not get along for the last like 3 weeks, and I didn't realize I could have changed doctors at that point, but that's besides the point. So, and so as first-time moms, I don't think you realize, you know, it might end in a C-section or you get pushed into a C-section, which I just hate for so many moms. And yes, that is going to start out your breastfeeding journey not going very well. I even did an interview with someone the other day that I didn't realize that the nurses weren't even telling her to breastfeed after her
Hmm.
cesarean for like 48 hours.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so she was like, "I didn't realize, and I hadn't taken a breastfeeding class, that you're supposed to be offering to the baby every 2 hours." And I was like, "Oh, no." So she felt like the nurses set her up for failure, from the beginning. So, mamas, if you do have a C-section, yes, they can even, you can even hold your baby during the C-section as long as it's like not an emergency. So I would ask for that if you feel comfortable and feel stable enough to do that. I think that would be absolutely wonderful. But if not, very shortly after, you need to be offering the breast if you're going to breastfeed. So um, I love that you shared that it took 6 months, and so that makes me really sad, that it took 6 months for you. And so mamas, I wanna let you know I am here for you, and I offer 30-day support, one-on-one support with me, and so you can send me DMs, messages, videos, and I will get back to you in less than 24 hours because I wanna set you up for success, and I want you to be on that breastfeeding journey as quickly as possible and not being like every day, I'm going to give up and in tears. Like I know, but I personally was in tears in the middle of the night. Like, I don't know if we can keep doing this another night. And so I
Hmm.
want to make sure we're setting you up for a breastfeeding journey as quickly as possible and making it as easy as possible. Yeah. So why don't you go on with your second story?
Well, that's I love what you're doing, Bethany. Thank you for being such a wonderful support to new moms because we all need it. My second baby, there's so much less to say about that breastfeeding journey. And again, I do think that, well, part of the reason why is because at that point, I breastfed my first son for about 2 years. So at that point, I had been doing it a while. So I don't know, my body kind of knew what it was doing more probably. But my second baby was born at home. So we had a VBAC at home, and the birth was entirely undisturbed, physiological, and he was never separated from me, nor I him. And I really do think, again, that like that set us up for success.
Mhm.
And so this time around, breastfeeding was just easy, simple, abundant supply, zero pain, breastfed him on demand. We also went about maybe a little bit into his third year. Yeah, we rested for about 2.5 years total, until he self-weaned. And that's really all I have to say about that part of the journey, because that part was easy. There was
Mhm.
zero problems. I mean, it was just wonderful. And I really do feel like I was just set up for success in that relationship in a different way, because we had a completely normal physiological birth and all of those wonderful, labor and birth hormones were all flowing through me that,
Mhm.
are all precursors to having to having a breastfeeding relationship, or at least part of it. And so, yeah, that was the second time. So much less to say.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that though. I also had natural births. Mine were in the hospital, but I did have two natural births. And I agree when you have that, skin to skin right away contact with your baby and let them do the crawl and latch right away. It is so magical. And I just love that there was no medicines in the way this time for you. So that is just wonderful. So, for all of our new mamas out there that haven't had their babies yet, what is one thing you wish you would have known about breastfeeding?
Ooh, I wish I would have known that it can be challenging. I
Mhm.
really just thought, I remember doing a lot of birth preparation and, researching things about babyhood and preparing the space and, focusing on those things. But I really took for granted that I thought breastfeeding, because it's just something our bodies were meant to do, that it would be easy. And it was, for me, it was not easy. And so because I hadn't really looked into that really,
Mhm.
by the time I needed support, when I had already had the baby, I didn't really have any support in place, like a lactation consultant or a La Leche League group, or anywhere to go for help. I really kind of like white knuckled it through for a while. And in retrospect, I really could have benefited from someone like you, or, some other professional that could have helped guide me through that journey a little bit more. So I would love all new moms to know that it can go smoothly, of course, and that's wonderful, but it also, and I hear this from a lot of new moms too, that the first time there can be a lot of challenges. And it is good if you can to line up support ahead of time. So it's
Mhm.
just there if you need it postpartum. And if you don't need it, awesome. But if you do, like having at least someone you could call is a really smart thing to do, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, again, I'm here for you, mamas. If you need help, please reach out. But I also like that you brought up there are groups. And so, pretty much almost in every town or town near you, there are breastfeeding support groups. And I went to one personally, and they also do weighted feeds for free are at these groups. And I was concerned my baby wasn't gaining enough weight. I was just being a first time mom that was worrying. And so every time I went, we would do a weighted feed just because. I was just so nervous, but there was nothing to be nervous about. He was getting as much as he needed every time. So those kind of put you to ease. And then also things you're struggling with, like I would bring up, he's not sleeping well. And they're like, oh, it's the 4-month sleep regression, right? And so I just felt like all these other mamas are helping you out on your journey. And it's not really a comparing, at least mine wasn't. I bet there are some like that. But I feel like everyone's open and willing to help. And even if you say something like, I don't feel like my breast pump's working and I have a Spectra, someone goes, I got a Mandela, I'll bring it in next week. Or you want to stop by my house afterwards? It's just sitting collecting dust. Why don't you come pick it up? So, really connect with that support within your community and make those bonds with other mamas.
Yes.
So, what was your favorite breastfeeding product?
I found a really supportive breastfeeding pillow to be indispensable. That
Mhm.
was the one thing I really needed. I always had it next to me. And I can't even remember the brand, to be honest, the one that I used, but I know that it was one of those like, it like curved around my body, right? So like the baby, I could be sitting and the baby could be on the pillow at breast level and the pillow kind of curved around my body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's a bunch of different brands, but
Yeah.
that is the one thing that I could not live without for
Yeah.
sure.
I know a lot of moms love the breast friend and also the boppy. The boppy's not as hard. Some moms like that better. So, but I know I would take it everywhere. Like we didn't live near family and I was always like, pack the boppy, let's go, you know? And so I would like carry it with me everywhere we went because it does save your back. So instead of you going down to your baby needs to come up to you, mama, so you don't kill your back. Trust me
Yep.
on this one, right? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I want mamas to know how they can connect with you and maybe work through their birth trauma with you.
Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you so much for having me. I think what you're doing is really wonderful and a great service to new moms. You can find me on social media at Healing Birth. That's all one word, no dashes or dots. Healing Birth. You can listen to my podcast. It's called Healing Birth on all podcast streaming platforms. Just search for the word Healing Birth. You'll see my face. That's what the podcast. Yeah, I think that's it. It's quite simple to find me, and I would love to connect with your listeners. And if anyone's listening that wants to listen to birth stories, powerful birth stories, challenging birth stories, all kinds of birth stories, check out the podcast.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. We were so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Bethany.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you loved this episode, it would mean so much if you would share it with another mama or post on social media and tag me. I want to personally thank you for wanting to help other mamas. You got this. I'm rooting for your breastfeeding journey.